So today we're diving into that moment when Great Britain just decided they'd had enough. They were going to shut down colonial rebellion, period.
Right.
But what happened next is kind of history's greatest irony. The crackdown they thought would force everyone into line, well, it basically became the ignition switch for the American Revolution.
That's really the heart of it. We're in 1774, the Boston Tea Party just happened, and Parliament is, to put it mildly, furious.
Livid.
Yeah, livid. They figure, years of small taxes and little fights haven't worked. They need a massive targeted show of force. And the result is 5 really punishing laws that the colonists started calling the Intolerable Acts.
The British goal was total submission.
And the result was total unity, the complete opposite of what they wanted.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We should probably start exactly where the British did.
Crushing Massachusetts.
Yeah, financially and politically. They went straight for Boston's economy with the Boston Port Act. This wasn't just a fine, right? This was strangling an entire city.
Oh, it was severe and immediate. Parliament just closed Boston Harbor. Completely.
And for a city like Boston, that's everything.
It's their lifeblood. It's an Atlantic shipping hub. So the Royal Navy shows up, they block the entrance, and that's it. No commercial ships can come in or go out, not until Boston pays for every last crate of that destroyed tea.
And that kind of pressure, it wasn't just aimed at the protesters, was it? It hit everybody.
Exactly. I mean, when a port shuts down, supply lines just vanish.
Right.
So you get immediate scarcity. Food, coal for heat, firewood, trade goods, everything becomes incredibly difficult and expensive to get. The whole point was to turn the average citizen against the radicals.
Make them so miserable they just give in.
Yeah, collective punishment. But while they're squeezing Boston's wallet, they also launched this direct attack on the colony's government with the Massachusetts Government Act.
Okay, so how did that work? Before this, the colonists had a pretty long tradition of governing themselves.
A very long tradition. For decades, they'd basically been left alone to run their own affairs. They elected members to their colonial council, which gave them a real say in their own laws.
And this act just wiped that away.
Completely gone. The new law said that the king, or his appointed governor, would now choose all the council members. So that representative body just became a rubber stamp for British policy.
Wow.
But it gets worse. It also struck at the most local level of democracy there was, the town meeting.
Which sounds small, but they were a huge deal, weren't they?
They were everything. That's where ordinary people debated local laws, decided on taxes, everything from fixing roads to hiring officers. The new act limited these meetings to just once a year.
Only once.
Once a year, unless you got special, explicit permission from the royal governor. So for the colonists, this wasn't just some rule change. It felt like they were losing their basic right to speak and assemble.
So you shut down the economy, you dismantle the government. How do you make sure your own officials are safe while they're enforcing all these incredibly unpopular laws?
Well, that's where the next act comes in, the Administration of Justice Act. And this one caused pure fury.
I can imagine.
The British knew that any official, a customs agent or a soldier who got into a violent clash with colonists would never get a fair trial in Massachusetts. The local juries would always side with the colonists.
So they created a loophole.
A giant one. They said if a British official was accused of a serious crime while on duty, the governor could move the trial.
Move it where?
To another colony or even all the way back to Great Britain.
So they basically got immunity. I heard George Washington called it the Murder Act.
He did. And that name tells you everything about the colonial fear, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Because if you're a victim or a witness, how on earth do you get justice? You can't just sail 3,000 miles across the Atlantic to testify.
It's impossible. The cost, the time away from your farm or your business, justice wasn't just delayed. It was, for all practical purposes, denied.
It just created a system where crown officials were, like, above the law.
Precisely. That double standard was a huge catalyst for radical thinking.
Which brings us to this growing feeling of military occupation. Let's talk about the Extended Quartering Act of 1774.
Right. There was an earlier version, but this one felt much more threatening because of all the new troops being sent in to enforce these laws.
Especially in Boston.
Oh, yeah. Boston was flooded with them.
Oh.
The 1774 Act required colonial authorities to provide much more housing. If the barracks were full, they had to find other spots.
Okay, spots.
Public houses, empty buildings, barns. Now, it's a bit of a myth that they were kicking families out of their homes to live in the living room.
Right.
But the daily friction it created was enormous.
It must have felt like a city under siege.
Totally. Imagine a permanent armed military force on your streets in peacetime. And worse, the local governments were forced to pay for their supplies, fire, candles, beer, you name it.
So you're being occupied, and you're forced to pay for the privilege of being occupied.
Yes. And it led to constant arguments, brawls. It was an ugly, tense situation.
So if those 4 laws weren't enough, Parliament passed a 5th one at the same time that really scared the other colonies, the Quebec Act.
This law is fascinating. It was actually a pretty smart piece of British legislation for managing Canada, but they completely misread how paranoid the American colonists were.
What was the first red flag for them?
Geography. The act hugely expanded Quebec's borders all the way down into the Ohio River Valley.
Land that other colonies thought was theirs.
Exactly. Colonies like Virginia and Pennsylvania saw it as their land for future expansion. Suddenly, their growth was blocked by this huge British-controlled French territory.
And it wasn't just about land, was it? The political and religious parts were even scarier to them.
Absolutely terrifying, especially for the very Protestant colonists. The act guaranteed freedom of religion for Catholics in Quebec,
And that sparked fears
of Catholic influence creeping south. But the real fear was the political structure. The Quebec Act allowed French civil law,
which didn't have.
trial by jury, or an elected assembly. So American colonists immediately connect the dots.
If they could do that next door in Canada.
It's only a matter of time before those same authoritarian rules get applied to us.
That's the real turning point, isn't it? The British wanted to isolate Boston, but instead they created for the first time real colonial unity.
The ultimate backfire. Before 1774, the colonies were always squabbling with each other, but when Boston got hit that hard, every other colony thought, we could be next.
That shared danger created a shared identity.
It really did. And we see the committees of correspondence, which already existed, just kick into high gear. They're sharing news, strategies for resistance, all at lightning speed.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just talk.
No, they were sending actual supplies, right?
Yeah. Colonies like South Carolina and Connecticut started sending money, food, supplies overland to help Boston survive. They were actively undermining the British plan.
And all of that leads to the first big organized response.
The First Continental Congress. It meets in Philadelphia, September 1774.
You've got delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies there. Big names. John Adams, Patrick Henry, George Washington. And it's so important to remember their goal at first. It wasn't independence.
Not at all. Not yet. They were trying to find a peaceful, legal way to convince King George to just repeal these acts and respect their rights as English citizens.
So they write up this formal document, the Declaration of Rights and Grievances.
And they state very clearly that they deserve all the same rights as people living in London. They protest taxation without representation, the loss of trial by jury, all of it.
And they were careful to blame Parliament for everything, right? They were still trying to show loyalty to the king.
They were. They were hoping he'd step in and be their protector. But London saw it completely differently.
They just saw rebellion.
They saw an illegal government meeting without permission and making demands. They refused to even officially acknowledge the document.
So with their legal pleas just ignored, Congress turns to its biggest weapon, economics.
The Continental Association.
A full-on economic boycott.
And it was an amazing display of unity. The agreement banned all imports from Great Britain, Ireland, the West Indies, and they also pledged to stop exporting their own goods to Britain if the acts weren't repealed.
But the real genius was how they enforced it. This wasn't just some handshake deal.
No, they set up local committees in towns all over the colonies to monitor people.
So like neighborhood watch for buying British goods.
Kind of. They would inspect merchant records, and if you kept buying British stuff, they would publicly shame you. They'd publish your name in the newspaper as an enemy of liberty.
Wow, the social pressure must have been intense.
It was. It pulled everyday citizens into the fight. And while all this economic pressure is building, so are the military preparations.
Especially back in Massachusetts with the British Army sitting right there in Boston.
For sure. The local militias start reorganizing.
And this is where we get the Minutemen.
That's right. The name was literal. These were citizen soldiers, farmers, shopkeepers who promised to be ready for battle at a minute's notice.
And they started hiding weapons.
Yep. Secretly collecting gunpowder and muskets. It was a direct act of defiance. And the British commander, General Gage, he knew it was happening. He started sending out spies to find their stashes. The stage was being set for a real conflict.
It's just such a massive miscalculation by London. Why did they so fundamentally misunderstand the Americans?
Well, from their perspective, it was simple. The colonies were subordinates and they owed money. Britain had this massive debt from the French and Indian War, and they expected the colonies to help pay for it.
They saw the Tea Party as just vandalism.
Criminal vandalism that required a strong response to reestablish who was in charge. They truly believed they had the absolute right to pass laws for the colonies. They expected them to just fall in line.
But they totally missed the psychology of it.
Completely. They didn't get how deeply the colonists valued their traditional English rights after decades of basically running their own affairs. London saw taxes. The Americans saw their liberty being systematically stripped away.
And that's the key, isn't it? They felt they were fighting to keep their rights as Englishmen, not necessarily to start a new country.
Not yet. But the Intolerable Acts proved that the British government was willing to use military force to take those rights away.
It turned a fight over money into a fight over freedom itself.
And the attempt to crack down didn't stop the rebellion. It created the very structures, the Congress, the boycott, the Minutemen, that made the rebellion possible.
And that tension just kept building and building until General Gage finally decided to seize those colonial supplies in the spring of 1775.
And the march out of Boston leads directly to Lexington and Concord, the first shots of the Revolution.
So what started as a punishment for one city
Ended up creating the foundation for a whole new country. The attempt to isolate them was the very thing that forced them to unite.
a truly catastrophic blunder for the British Empire. See you next time.